EDA Town Hall for September 14th, 2025. And on this week's Town Hall, we're going to be discussing recent rulings by the Supreme Court, and one in specific that effectively makes legal, at least temporarily, the racial profiling of people, in specific by ICE, but one, I imagine, could extend it to other law enforcement. And for all those kind of details, we're going to be joined by really one of the preeminent progressive lawyers in the country right now, Chris Newman, who is a lawyer who represents NDLON, the National Day of Labor Organizing Network. He's based in Los Angeles. We certainly have many mutual friends, Chris and I. I hear his name often. And of course, Erika Andiola, who has frequently been a guest on these town halls speaking about the crisis of the Trump administration's attack on immigrant communities, and organizing in opposition to it, is now working with the National Day Labor Organizing Network. And thanks to Erika and Dan O'Neill and the team in Arizona, we were able to line up Chris Newman being on this show. Now, obviously, at the top of the show, I always want to say that this is Progressive Democrats of America's National Town Hall. We have these every week. And every week we focus on one or two different subjects and have featured guests who relate to the different subjects. Sometimes, of course, we have candidates, and sometimes guests who've been on before or on again. But and this week we decided at the staff meeting on Wednesday that we were going to focus on what was an outrageous ruling, though, again, the nature of the ruling in terms of how the Supreme Court, makes its declarations and what exactly it was doing. On Monday, it basically, in its what's called its shadow docket, so not opining on the direct merits of the law, but basically undercutting lower courts that had blocked the operation of ICE in terms of racial profiling. They ruled in favor of the Trump administration and declared that these practices could go forward, that ICE could proceed as they had been before. The lower courts had set rulings against them, targeting people by their ethnicity, by the language they spoke, where they were working, etc. And so the ruling, though, of course, is outrageous. And it was on Monday, and it was very, very much major news. Of course, at the same time, in the first half of the week, there was a lot of news around the release by Democrats in the House of a letter that Donald Trump had with his hand drawing, submitted into a book celebrating Jeffrey Epstein's 50th birthday. And then actually in the hour of our town hall on Wednesday, our staff meeting rather on Wednesday, Charlie Kirk was shot and killed in Utah. And of course that changed the whole fabric of the week. And so I'm going to say a few things in relationship to that at the top of the hour. I'm also going to see if Donna Smith has any thoughts she wants to share on the event and the fallout as well. Our guests are going to join us just a few minutes later, or rather, Chris Newman is going to join us a few minutes later than normally our guests join us in the first hour, but he'll be then with us till the top of the hour. And then in the second hour, I'd like to, as we open up to a dialogue with everybody participating in the town hall, can get on Stack and add to the chat, etc. Their thoughts on where we are. And one of the things I would want to do at the top of the second hour, and I'll say this now as well, is direct people to Bernie Sanders' recorded statement from, I think, 2 evenings ago, where he's talking about the eloquence, very eloquently, about his strong opposition to political violence and the necessity of everybody opposing political violence in a democratic country and in a democratic society. It's very eloquent. It's pitch perfect, in my opinion, and absolutely what he says is what we at PDA endorse. Obviously, we condemn wholeheartedly the assassination of Charlie Kirk and the use of such political violence in all instances. And however, of course, this has become a rather complex subject because the nature in which people are condemning it, and there's almost universal condemnation by any person who's actually spoken out publicly. Obviously, there's been some idiotic stuff put on websites and so on. And of course, what people put on websites is very much a part of the texture of the whole dialogue going on around, political discourse in America and how these things proceed. And maybe where the spaces develop where people get drawn into believing that political violence is okay because of online dialogues. That's certainly a major issue. But nobody is who's been a public figure has endorsed political violence, and certainly not this act either. But there's no doubt that President Trump himself and many people who would have, of course, previously been seen as being allied with Charlie Kirk on the right wing of American politics um, uh, have very aggressively blamed our political movement as progressives, and not just the left, but even just more broadly, people, Democrats, even it seems sometimes from the center all the way to the left, as being somehow responsible for this act. And of course, we clearly want to, of course, state what is obvious about PDA and obvious from these town halls where, we very recently and through to this present have been promoting nonviolent civil disobedience as something that people really need to sort of re-up their commitment to in this era of heightened political contestation in our society. But we obviously stridently oppose all acts of political violence and at PDA. But I don't know that anything we can say on that front necessarily won't immediately negate this very aggressive and very frightening, um, uh, and again, being led by the president, uh, condemnation of progressives in the political left as somehow stoking political violence. So that's some material that we'll talk about in the second hour. And I want to again frame everything that we're saying underneath the top line message, which is, of course, what Bernie so eloquently articulated, and hopefully what I, no doubt, less eloquently just made clear to everybody. Um, so we'll go to Mike Fox in a few minutes with our PDA to-dos. But Donna, how you doing? What are your thoughts for this week?
I'm doing okay, Alan, and thank you for everybody who's been patient as my family's been going through a bit of a health crisis with my husband. But as you were speaking, I was thinking of this theme. I talked to somebody else here in my family not too long ago, and we had some gun violence here in Colorado this week again, sadly. We had Evergreen High School students, one who shot two others who fortunately survived, but then shot and killed himself on campus. And we have had other school shootings in Colorado, as people will remember, Columbine, and we had the theater shooting. And my own family was touched by gun violence when my son Russell, more than 30 years ago, a gunman came into the place where he worked 5 minutes after he left, shot and killed four of Russell's coworkers, and seriously injured the fifth. So I know in all of these shootings, there are people in the background who are suddenly being thrust into a situation of fear, a situation of the unknown, a situation of not understanding what's happening in our world, and maybe will never be quite right again. There are victims all over the place. And these are kids, folks. These are kids. And what I would ask us to remember, I know, and Alan, I echo everything you said, and Bernie's statement was beautiful. And, I echo everything you said about political violence, but I'd like us to look at a little bit broader picture of this week. Once again, we had two young white men who were isolated, really kind of isolated from their communities and very well to do, both from wealthy families, and both took guns as their way to express their anger. I'll bet not specifically at the people they shot. I'll bet not. I'll bet just at isolate, whatever. If we don't start looking at this broken society and what's happening to our young people, who are isolating themselves on the internet and otherwise. We're just going to see more and more and more, to the point where we don't mention these as much anymore. They fall off. They almost don't make the lead page anymore when we have school shootings. And then I read a beautiful, beautiful op-ed on this week, if there can be beauty in these situations. It said, sooner or later, there will be an Emmett Till's mother. Sooner or later, one of these families of a dead child shot at school is going to release a photo. And then I think the conversation will change, sadly. Anyway, I also, and that subject always tortures me, folks. I know PDA has not, we cover a lot of issues, but we have not taken the dive into the gun issue. It's a big one. It's a big one for me. Not as directly in policy, Alan. I don't think we have taken.
Oh yeah, no. Well, we certainly. I mean, I go back to the late '70s, early '80s when handguns should be outlawed. I mean, I'm pretty hardcore. Yeah,
Yeah. I mean, it's just awful, Alan. So here, on top of all of this, and what I try to think about, first of all, my faith calls me to love my enemies, which is real hard sometimes, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
Right at the moment, it is really, really hard sometimes. But I keep trying to remember, folks are not my enemies. That most of the people, yes, I do have a few enemies in the world, but most of the people around me are not my enemies, and I should not see them as such. So
Mm-hmm.
I too abhor the violence, and we need to do more work. Second issue that you touched on, the immigration issue, which to me is as violent and awful right now as gun violence is. But I would love to have seen a perp walk of the Hyundai CEO.
Mm-hmm.
Why do we gather up all the people who work for these companies, who know they're hiring labor from people who don't have green cards, who aren't yet documented, whatever status they're in? They know it. The employers know it. Why do we give them a pass? I really wish the people who do the hiring, I first of all, I'm of the opinion that no person's illegal, and I want people to stay here. But if we're going to do this massive kind of punishment that we did, rounding people up at a Hyundai plant and getting them back to South Korea or wherever he was taking those folks, why don't we arrest the person responsible for putting them there? I don't get it. So that's another thing I thought about. And then finally, I was scrolling down the list of this is as a prelude to Positively Progressive finally being able to relaunch. I was scrolling through the list of participants just now today, and I was seeing names. I saw one name from Ithaca, New York, and I saw names, of course, from Colorado. I saw suburban Chicago. I certainly saw California. I saw, dare I say, Arlington, Texas, right in front of me right now. But what was important to me, in each of those places, I remembered people from years ago, maybe people who are not living anymore, who left these wonderful breadcrumbs of organizing behind them that are now carrying forward in younger voices, new chapters, and things happening for PDA. That is so cool, folks. That is really cool. Alan, these calls never used to be as big. You remember when they were very small.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not just that it's the Trump era. We've been organizing for a long time, and this is wonderful stuff. So I just want to close with something really positive, because it's been a very, very heavy week again
Mm-hmm.
of stuff to listen to, right? But we're together, and as Fox always reminds us, we're with like-minded people. But not only are we with like-minded people, we are carrying forward the organizing work that was started 20 years ago and that will be going on 20 years from now. I'm confident. I believe that. So thanks, Alan. Back to you.
Well, thank you, Donna. So I want to actually just follow up a little bit on what Donna said. There have been so many eloquent comments. One that I thought was very eloquent, and of course you have to go back in time now. This is before, I think they just were getting this Tyler Robinson's profile understood to a degree. And a guy named Scott Galloway, who some of what he stands for, I'm not in line with. I think he sees himself more for some reason on the economic, more in the moderate spectrum, but his critique of online culture, and he's a professor at I think NYU in New York, and he's pretty prominent. And he has a co-host, and they have a great dialogue about the damage that is being done to young people with the being extremely online, and how that channels people, and how we all know it's the case, and we're doing nothing to stop it. So I'm putting that link into the chat right there. Um, now,
So important, Alan. How
mm,
many of us know people that not only use those screens as babysitters for kids when
mhm.
they're really little, but these children, they grow up spending just they're up all night on the screens. It's crazy. Anyway, yeah, I something's got to change. Something's got to
And
change.
before I throw to Mike Fox with our PDA to dos, and hopefully we'll be joined by Chris Newman after the PDA to dos, I just want to say that we might be joined by a couple people from Utah
Oh,
to give us their reflections on how this has all felt being in Utah at in the second hour. And in the second hour, again, we'll just sort of frame this issue, ask for people to comment, and go from there. Actually, just quickly, three more things.
yeah,
Um,
one more thing for me too, Alan. I would ask people to think just briefly. I know it's hard to do. I know it's hard for you to do, but put yourself in the shoes of the families of the shooters and all of these shootings right now. Put yourself in those shoes and imagine the horror of that and the torture of that. And I just think somehow we have to remember our humanity and all this stuff and work together to get it stopped.
Um, Thank you, Donna. And I want to let people know that when Chris Newman comes on, we will be turning the chat off. We turn the chat off in the period where our featured guest is on. And we do that because it just distracts from people listening to our featured guest. And Chris Newman is very knowledgeable about where the courts are in the country right now, how they relate to the Trumpian authoritarian offensive against democracy, in particular around immigrant rights and labor rights. So we will want people to chime in on that. I want to give a big shout out on behalf of everybody here. Congratulations to Heart So Gray, who was married yesterday. He is the national coordinator of YPDA, or at least he is he's on a sabbatical from that because he's running for Congress. So big props to Hartzell Gray. I want to say too that Hartzell will be in Southern California at an event on Saturday, the 27th. I'll be there with him, and we'll have more details next week. And I hope it is a fundraiser for his congressional race, but I hope everybody in Southern California can come around and meet Hartzell. We'll do everything to accommodate as many people as possible. Hopefully, people can donate as well. It's actually a split fundraiser, PDA and Hartzell, because PDA is going to do a lot for Hartzell Gray. And with that, I'm going to throw to Mike Fox with our PDA to dos, and I'll be back in a couple minutes to introduce Chris Newman. Take it away, Mike Fox.
Thank you, Alan. Can you hear me?
I can indeed.
Thank you, sir. The buttons are giving me trouble today. Thank you all for your patience. And first and foremost, gang, to do number one, as Donna had referenced, let's all revel in the fact that we're surrounded by people who get it. No question, this has been a rough week. No question, we've had a lot of rough weeks. No question, we're going to have more rough weeks. And that's why we are here every Sunday, okay? It helps us first and foremost heal. And I want to apologize to all the new folks. I mask because of a medical situation. I apologize for it. It's a long story. But in any event, I literally see this as healthcare, literally every week. Just you being here makes me healthier. And I genuinely want to thank every person here for that. And I would hope that everyone on this call gets that feeling as well. And the number one goal on this call is for you to leave this call feeling better than you came in the door. I hope you felt good when you came in, but nonetheless, let's purposefully focus on how we can all feel better as a result of this engagement. Okay. So, excuse me. And so to do number two, now, as we move on from the feel good, which is important, number two is getting things done. So I would ask, please take notes. Okay. And thank you for raising your hand, Marcy. For right now, we're not taking questions, but we will take questions. Please, everybody, hold on that until Alan calls for questions and comments. It tends to be distracting for folks. Okay. And likewise, everybody, while our guests are speaking, Jim will be turning the chat off, not to silence you, but bottom line, to get everybody focused is the point. The beauty of the chat being open, and please realize, think about it, gang. On the other organizations' calls, bottom line, they're normally webinars. There is no engagement like that. We try to keep it open, transparent, and likewise reinforce engagement. However, the chat can become a big distraction. So we're just trying to keep everybody focused and on task here. And that's kind of a rough situation with over 300 people in the room. Okay. But anyway, take notes, take notes, take notes. Okay. Because we've got deadlines that we will likewise be addressing in this call. All right, so finally, the time and treasure drill down. It won't be a deep drill down because we've got a big long list of to-dos, and I'll be tossing that big long list of to-dos list into the chat. We'll talk about that a little bit more on the back end of this call. On the front end, we focus on number one, phone bank, phone bank, phone bank, phone bank. We got a bunch of phone bankers on this call right now. Phone bankers, identify yourself in the chat and include the link. Sign up. Ask people to jump on board with us. It's pdamerica.org/volunteer. Okay. We just came off of the big win in Virginia's 11th. We held that seat. Adelita Grijalva is going to have her special election next Tuesday. So we got to be on the phones. And there are a boatload of other projects as well. And if you want to get into the deep dive of what all the projects are, every Thursday, 9 o'clock Eastern, 6 o'clock Pacific is our campaign call. That's where the heavy lifters hang out, and we identify big long list of to-dos. Okay. So anyway, phone bank, pdamerica.org/volunteer. That's the time. Now the treasure. At PDA, we take great pride, candidly, in the fact that the majority of our work gets done by volunteers. And that's the way it ought to be, we feel, in Progressive Democrats of America. It's a civic duty kind of an approach, right? It's a lifestyle, the folks at at Progressive Democrats of America. So we, of course, volunteer. We have volunteering as our primary ask. However, two things. Number one, the light bill has to be paid, candidly. And likewise, if we don't get enough volunteers on board and we aren't hitting our goals, and that's how we're going to turn this ship around, by establishing aggressive goals and attaining them, then we're going to have to hire people to make the calls, right? So one of two things, either. And if you can do both, wonderful. If you're a double dipper, and we got a bunch of phone bankers who have already donated today, and thank you all to all of the double dippers up to this point. In any event, from a donation standpoint, what we're looking for is solidarity. That's what this call is all about. Solidarity. So please do toss in whatever you can. If it's $1, all good. If it can be more than that, wonderful. There is no amount that is too small, candidly. What we're looking for is each and every one of us showing solidarity with each other, with respecting the work that people on this call are doing, and showing some positive reinforcement for it. Okay. So if you don't see the link that I'm tossing into the chat, just go to pdamerica.org, hit that donate button, toss in whatever you can. And we'll be back at the top of the hour to see where we're at on our goals. Back to you, Alan.
Thank you, Mike Fox. And my effort to have a little snack here. I'm still
caught.
Yeah, I'm caught indeed. By way of framing the conversation with Chris Newman, who I'll introduce formally in a second, I actually want to put into the chat two YouTube links to a podcast that I'm not necessarily a big fan of, and it's hosted by Ezra Klein. I'll say this about Ezra Klein: the person who does the headlines for his podcasts is very succinct and good at writing headlines. So I'm putting them in right now, and they both pertain to the conversation we're about to have. The first is Trump is building his own paramilitary force. And that was the long podcast that he did, does them weekly. And this was now 2.5 weeks ago or so, maybe 16 days ago or so. And then about 9 days ago, he did the Supreme Court is backing Trump's power grab. And that, I think, is hugely important for people just to take hold of that thought right now, because there's just such a flurry of activity from the Trump administration. In many respects, the change that they're achieving and seeking to achieve in terms of making this a much more authoritarian society organized around the power of the executive has been a number of rulings by courts around the country that have gone against Trump, and there's a consistent drumbeat of these, and I believe the lower courts are largely on balance in line with the Constitution in that regard. And so many of them, at the time of this recording, Trump was on a 16 case winning streak at the Supreme Court. And as we know from the way that we are structured in terms of our federal system, relationship to the states, the Supreme Court has tremendous authority over how things operate across the entire country. And so the courts are essentially ruling and confirming this notion of a unitary executive that the right wing has embraced. Whenever you have Republican presidents, they embrace it. So it seems. And the podcast with Ezra Klein, the guest is very good, and they do review a lot of the content. Though he does play devil's advocate, or maybe that's what he's doing. Maybe he just believes it sometimes, but he sometimes takes some positions I certainly wouldn't embrace on it. But again, I can't tell if he's being devil's advocate in this case, but it's a good summary of where the things were as of about 9 days ago. So the reason that we've invited Chris Newman on, and again, I'll do a formal introduction in a second, really is because of an outrageous ruling from the Supreme Court just this past Monday. It seems like it was a lot longer ago, and that's sort of the nature of the Trump years. And this ruling pretty much gave a green light to explicit racial profiling. Something that, if racial profiling was shown to be in evidence, this was against the law, I think, in all of our conceptions of American jurisprudence. But lower courts had ruled against ICE, that ICE was clearly involved in racial profiling around language, ethnicity, place of work. I think there was a fourth criteria there. And they were proceeding, and they were stopped by lower courts. And the Supreme Court, without ruling on the merits, though Kavanaugh actually did write something on this, they ruled on this sort of secondary type of ruling that they do at the Supreme Court, something called a shadow docket, which allows them to, without ruling on the merits, just reverse how the lower courts have stopped something. So in effect, they've greenlit it, and of course it was a 6-3 ruling, and Judge Sotomayor wrote a very, very eloquent dissent. So we are honored to have with us Chris Newman, somebody I have based in Los Angeles, and I have a lot of mutual friends with Chris. And I'm now scooting over to his bio here. And Chris Newman, in my orbit, is a legend, by the way. And he is the legal director and general counsel for the National Day Laborer Organizing Network, NDLON, NDLON, based in its Los Angeles office. He has worked with day laborers since 2002, was hired as NLON's first attorney in 2004, and since then has helped develop and coordinate NLON's work to defend and advance day laborers' civil, workplace, and human rights. He was counsel on a coalition lawsuit challenging Arizona's SB 1070 in federal court, and he has been very active and vocal in tracking all that has been going on with the Trump administration ICE attacks on immigrant workers and day laborers over these past, whatever it's been now, 9 months. So, Chris Newman, with that, thank you and welcome to PDA's National Town Hall.
Alan, thank you so much for having me, and thank you to all for spending time with me virtually. Before we get started, just so that I know, because I'm in here at the last request of Erika and Andiola, who I know you guys work with. How much time are we budgeting? Because there's so many things that I could say, and so many different kind of rabbit holes I could go down. I just want to make sure I have a decent sense.
Yeah, basically, if you could just your thoughts beginning sort of spinning off of the ruling on Monday, okay, and how it relates out towards the general ability of people to defend themselves against ICE and all that ICE is doing, not just to day laborers, but to immigrant workers and general workers and citizens and residents, et cetera, how that relates to where we are right now. And then I would also like to hear your general reflections. So maybe this can be in a second volley after we go back to me as an interlocutor. Your thoughts on where we are with the courts and the Trump administration in general, how generally treacherous is the terrain of particularly the Supreme Court and the US courts in terms of what seems to be a real shredding of our Constitution and the society teetering towards a level of authoritarianism we'd never see here. We never thought we would see in this country. Yeah.
Okay. Well, maybe I think those are related, so I'll kind of jump back and forth on that. Let's see. So yeah, Monday was a calamitous decision and concurrence, and a disgusting concurrence by Kavanaugh, and you framed things rightly, but just I guess maybe to tell the kind of linear story. Since Los Angeles has been invaded, it's not just, by the way, by ICE, and actually one of the unique and strange things is that the Border Patrol sector agent is Bovino is in charge of ICE in Southern California, and of course we don't know who these masked agents are, which is part of the problem because they're not identifying themselves. But let's just call them federal. Well, I mean, we can call them Trump's police force colloquially as well. A number of different, as one would imagine, a number of different civil rights entities, including the ACLU, Public Counsel, and others, were kind of coming up with different kind of litigation theories to go in and to get a judge to make it stop. We coalesced together in a broad coalition lawsuit, including the ACLU, Public Counsel, and lead counsel Annie Lai from UC Irvine Law School, who was one of the key civil rights lawyers in Arizona fighting against Joe Arpaio. It so happened that we attached on to a case that Andiola was involved in. The National Day Labor Organizing Network. We're based in Pasadena, have been doing quite a bit of work post the fire and recovery there. So we got all the cases basically combined. We had a great judge, Judge Frimbrong, and we went in and asked for a temporary restraining order ahead of the preliminary injunction phase. And I'm sure there's plenty of lawyers on this call. I mean, there's any number of potential sort of routes for challenging the type of lawless behavior that these masked agents have been involved in. We focus on a Fourth Amendment theory and got an injunction arguing that what we were seeing before our eyes was in fact the case, which was that this was just sort of grotesque racial profiling. The government appealed to the Ninth Circuit. We prevailed in the Ninth Circuit. Then I will take a brief moment, and we have staff attorneys on that case. I'm not counsel on that case, so in some ways I feel more comfortable to kind of editorialize a little bit. On the other hand, I also want to be respectful. But for after the stay was sought in the Supreme Court by the Trump administration, it was clear, particularly at the moment of the Penske Trojan horse raid at the Home Depot on Wilshire Boulevard, that the Trump administration was violating the temporary restraining order. And a lot of people had questions about why it is and how it is that they did that. The judge said, cut it out, essentially, while this litigation is going to take place. There's a balance of inquiries early on, various tests, but, preserve the crime scene. We'll litigate the case over a number of years, but stop doing this type of racial profiling. The Trump administration, of course, resumed it. And people, wonder why it is that they were able to do that. I mean, it's indicia of their disregard for courts. For tactical reasons, the lawyers in the case decided not to seek contempt motions. Instead, to wait to see what happened in the Supreme Court. And then, and most commentators expected that the Supreme Court would do what they have been doing, using the shadow docket to basically punt on cases, but to lift the immediate remedial injunctive relief that we had been getting. What I don't think anticipated was the way in which they did it. And so, by way of context, Endelon is lead counsel on the lawsuit challenging the termination of TPS for Venezuelans and Haitians, among others. Similar situation happened. We were winning. That's violated of the Constitution and the Administrative Procedure Act. The Supreme Court also, in that case, took the extraordinary act of lifting the injunction that Judge Chen in San Francisco had imposed with very careful consideration. But in that case, we got 2 paragraphs that just, hey, we're lifting the injunction, go back to court. And in some ways, it's helped. And I'll bracket that in case you're interested in discussing, because that case will be back in front of the Supreme Court very soon. But then here comes Judge Kavanaugh, who truly is one of the world's worst people. And people, again, history, we're in this kind of bizarre, time zone where it's hard to remember. But remember, he was the guy that got subbed in after they, stole the seat. Despite himself being, credibly accused of sexual assault, and the like. And his decision, among the reasons why it's so extraordinary, is how completely devoid of facts it was. I mean, of course, when you use the shadow docket, you don't get arguments, so you don't get the benefit of, kind of back and forth with counsel about the record. You're going on very quick briefing. By the way, our briefing in that case was prolix with examples of racial profiling, U.S. citizens, people with green cards, et cetera.
Right.
But here comes this decision where this guy not only doesn't use facts, but does, if you read the decision, go back and read it, which I would encourage you to do. I mean, it's almost like a work of fiction made up entirely of racist stereotypes.
Was it formally part of the decision? I thought it was sort of like an extracurricular edition. Yeah.
Yeah, no, it's a concurrence. So we know that at least 5, probably 6, had voted to lift the injunction. We also know that no one else put their name next to it, not even Judge, any of these other judges.
Right.
So it was a powerful dissent. It was a concurrence. So again, it's not formally speaking law, but this is, I'll just tell you, and I don't want to skip ahead, but among the reasons why the decision is so troubling is because it sent more than just a dog whistle to sheriffs that are using 287G immigration authority, to other ICE agents, basically like, go ahead. It was a sort of, these cases at the injunctive stage are often just a sign of which way the wind is blowing. And it's the wind, both by material effect, lifting an injunction which violated they weren't already complying with, but also as a signal to others, keep doing it, and racial profiling is okay, particularly as you say, when there's this factor of low wage work that gets sort of laced onto the racist kind of shotgun approach that they've been having. So the decision itself, I don't want to say it's a silver lining, but a caveat, a star on this whole thing is, Kavanaugh's by himself, putting his name on it, doesn't have the force of law. And it is, and I'll get to this, it is imperative that we start to, I think, we in the broader community, which we're not arguing before the Supreme Court, who by definition, by virtue of our appearance in the court, are lending legitimacy. It's important, I think, for people to be out there calling into question the Supreme Court's legitimacy, particularly on cases with respect to immigration. And again, I'm happy to kind of talk a bit more about that in detail, but obviously you're left, as everyone is, trying to reconcile how the exact same judges, so this is not a different tenured, you're going back and undoing Thurgood Marshall, the same judges in the span less than, 18 months said that you could not use race with respect to remedial admission policies in colleges, but you can use race when it comes to, persecuting people. And they're going to have to figure out a way, in some ways, to square that circle one way or the other, as some of these other cases now go back, because it's clearly incoherent. And to get to your second point about the courts, it is clear that they, and everything I think in kind of Supreme Court litigation now has become a matter of kind of pop political psychology, figuring out the motivations of these judges who are clearly, partisan, I mean, by virtue of their presence in the case of from Kavanaugh on, and effect in terms of their decisions. And most commentators have noted accurately, I think, that they are concerned that there will be a constitutional crisis, a clinical constitutional crisis, defined as a final resolution of a case. So not like the LA raids case, but the final word on a substantive case where the Trump presidency and his people like Steve Miller decide, to hell with it, we're not following your order.
Right.
And in that case, there is nothing in law or even, kind of norms or history. You have to go back to Jackson to what happens. The Supreme Court doesn't have its police, and Trump has police, and so part of what people I think have seen is that they're trying to punt on these procedural cases because most people believe that if and when Trump does just sort of overtly violate a Supreme Court decision, he will likely do it on an immigration case on the theory that people don't give a shit about immigrants and it doesn't affect me. And I am involved, and I'll just stop here so you can ask questions. The closest we've come to this was another case that I was involved in. I represent Kilmar Abrego Garcia's family, the gentleman who was wrongfully not even deported, but renditioned to El Salvador. And in that case, again, on a similar kind of intermediate appeal, the Supreme Court said, you have to facilitate his return.
Right.
Steve Miller went on television and said, we're doing no such thing.
Right.
And it was political pressure in the end that brought Kilmar back, and now things are going well in that case. But even that was not, at the end. And it's clear that the court is being bullied by Trump. It is, and its legitimacy, it's worried about its legitimacy if and when Trump creates a constitutional crisis. But the other legitimacy it's losing is by these incredibly wrong-headed decisions. And the final thing I'll just say here at this point, because more to the point and to the spirit of this group, the scariest to me thing about this decision, about the shadow docket in the use of the shadow docket in the TPS case with Judge Chen and other cases, is the extent to which the Supreme Court is denuding trial courts of authority. And I don't think that gets enough attention, because federal district courts are the one branch, to my eye, of the federal government currently not under the control of Donald Trump. And so you have great district court judges that are the first, the kind of ambulances, the MASH units, and doing great decisions. And here you have the Supreme Court over and over again saying, no, we're going to consolidate power in our court. And not only that, on the one hand, we're going to consolidate power in the Supreme Court. On the other hand, we're gonna kind of, cede that power to Trump and to what Trump's doing. And that is really, really dangerous. And it bodes very poorly for, thinking of using courts as a last line of defense against this, kind of incipient authoritarianism, fascism, or whatever you want to describe, which I think is currently underway. I wish I could give more silver linings than that. But we're back in. We will be back in court, on a preliminary injunction hearing. I think there are things that we can do. Maybe there will be new claims. I mean, another sliver of, not again silver lining, is the extent to which Kavanaugh and his concurrence said that, they were doing nothing to kind of undermine actions against the excessive use of force. But we're all seeing on our screens every day the excessive use of force, which then calls into question why it is that he didn't look into those facts. But the people that have been going to street corners with Adopt-A Corners, with Home Depot demonstrations, pulling out their phones, have been instrumental not only in providing the ammunition for the lawyers who are litigating the case, but also for the arguments we're making in the court of public opinion, which are obviously crucial, as this case will invariably go back up on appeal again.
Yeah, no, and just a couple of things, and then I did have one final general question I wanted to toss to you. But first, I mean, you're right that it's just a shadow ruling, and Kavanaugh's a concurrence, but Kavanaugh's laying the table for the court not throwing in a constitutional crisis, but agreeing with Trump, right? And I find it just politically, again, my reading of the tea leaves and watching this sort of Republican coordinated Federalist Society, control over the Supreme Court, that I just assume that Kavanaugh would not have been producing that if he didn't have at least four other Republicans more or less into them. Yeah.
Definitely had. I mean, in terms of result, they definitely had a majority. It was a 6-3 decision on the on the lifting of the stay. But in terms of the actual force of law to the decision, no one else put their name on it. Now, maybe that's because they're reluctant to put down again, kind of editorial. Basically, it was like an op-ed. It was like a hot take on TikTok, corresponding with a substantive decision that that they can continue engaging in these raids. The dangerous thing, it's more than a hot take in the sense that again, if you are a law enforcement agent who's inclined to engage in racial profiling or abusive behavior, you get a kind of, an indication that there seems to be Supreme Court approval for that. And that's why I think it's so dangerous, particularly, like I said, for these local sheriffs that are using immigration authority or even just assigning their own immigration authority as a reason to over police immigrant communities or people that are perceived to be adjacent to the immigrant community.
Yeah, you mentioned that, by the way, and I think this is it's always important for us progressives to hear this, which is that tragically and appallingly, the public still gives Trump higher approvals on his policies around immigration and the border than almost any issue that's declined less. It's declined from where it was when he came in. But in other words, progressives don't have a popular position. So your point is well taken that it's a test case for this because of that. But it's, I fear, also a test case because there's something you made reference to before, which is the Supreme Court does not have its own military, its own police force. And this is very much a super empowered police force. So it both serves both of those purposes, the lack of the public maybe going along with it because of where the polling is on immigration, but also it would instantly be there's just this intimidating force out there in the back of the mind of the Supreme Court or the justices or anybody in the judiciary around how they can just go forward with this because it's so in place, it's so incredibly well funded. The ICE budget is massive now. And that's terrifying. And it's also very, very terrifying a little bit. Let's not get into this. We'll talk about it maybe in the second hour with just the general audience here. But, obviously what Trump has said this past week around we need to go out and destroy the left wherever it exists, right? That's something that, he has an appetite for. No doubt elements in his administration has an appetite for. But that's, of course, further down the road because free speech is generally very popular with the general public. But you can see intimidation of the court through a case like immigration where the paramilitary is in place. That would then soften up the general public for more of these kind of, authoritarian moves. But again, I'm out ahead of myself and we're not there yet. And in fact, the question I have, and I somewhat hinted on this in the little language I wrote around the announcement for this. And we did invite Erika to come. I know she's super, super busy, so I understand her not being here. She's been on a couple of our town halls. Okay, the Supreme Court is generally, and let's say on immigration in particular, maybe poised, especially with the Kavanaugh concurrence, to rule appallingly against what we understood law to be, what we understood the rights of individuals to be in terms of habeas corpus across the board, right? And it goes badly in the courts. What do you feel as a lawyer can be achieved by the public in opposition? And in particular, organizing nonviolently, nonviolence, civil disobedience, but mass action. Is that just going to fall on deaf ears in the courts? Does public expression of dissent, how can it influence the courts, especially done in the best kind of MLK, Thoreauian, Gandhian manner? How can that impact when
Listen,
go ahead.
That's a great question, and again, it's related to your the thing that you were talking about right before. His popularity is highest of all on crime, second on immigration. And what we're seeing now is this notion that he's kind of asserting criminality with association, to the left or whatever that means. Public opinion is imperative. I mean, the two places with which the court derives its legitimacy or derives its power are, number one, from the police force that works for Trump, DHS, FBI, and so forth, that can enforce decisions, and then from its legitimacy. And most scholars who talk about, and by the way, almost all, are terrified that we are barreling toward a constitutional crisis. And in that circumstance, it's imperative that we have public opinion on our side, because then the Supreme Court will be, constrained in some sense by ruling on something or Trump will be constrained by non-compliance with something where it's clear that the public is no longer on his side. And in that respect, we can't wait until that moment happens. We need to build public support for these cases along the way. And if I could return and digress, but again, it's an answer to your question. That's exactly what happened with Kilmar Abrego Garcia. And it was clear to me early on in the Kilmar case, number one, that if Kilmar didn't get a good remedy, that no immigrant would potentially have a remedy, because here's a guy that functionally had had won his encounter after having been wrongfully arrested because there was no sanctuary policy in Maryland at the time. He was turned over to ICE, but he won his case. If everyone saw and accepted and internalized that he didn't get a remedy, given just the mountains of injustice and illegality that was kind of imposed on him, then that it was clear that no one was safe. The Trump administration then became very, very invested in railroading him and using all possible levers of power from the highest office in the land to again have him sentenced to a life imprisonment in a Salvadoran prison with no trial, no charges, nothing. And in that case, it was the fact that public opinion, I think, turned on him, on Kilmar in particular, in measurable ways, that ultimately compelled them to extradite Kilmar back. And now he's got a whole other series of problems. But it is so important that we figure out a way to chisel away at this notion, which again is haunting and weird, that a majority or whatever number of people support Trump on crime and immigration plus, because again, now you're seeing, equating trans identity to criminality, activism to criminality, and so forth. It is imperative that we figure out some way to chisel away at that if we're going to have any chance of A, winning on these cases when they get back up to the Supreme Court, and B, having Trump comply with the actual orders. And that might be the kind of hopeful sort of note to end or land on, which is, I've worked for immigrant rights in immigrant rights for 25 years. And among the reasons why things have gone the way that they have is because, in my view, is the fight for political equality, legalization, amnesty, if you will, for immigrants has never been something that has carried with it rights for other people. And so the reason why I think the relationship between the immigrant rights movement and other social justice movements, that we study and revere throughout history is an apposite. It's because at most, in winning sort of amnesty and legalization and, political equality, we're winning sort of for fairness for those people, those dreamers, for those farm workers that are working. But it's never been the case that at least in the eyes of the public, that undocumented immigrants are carrying with their fight for emancipation a defense of rights that are shared by everybody. And right. One opportunity that's starting to develop, and you can see with all these different cases, TPS, Kilmar, and the Raids case that I'm involved in, and others as well, is that it's now becoming clear that the very people being criminalized and on the receiving end, the whip end of Trump's authoritarianism are themselves defending constitutional values that are shared by everyone. And so Mr. Vasquez, the lead plaintiff in the LA raids case, I hope one day will be understood to be like Mr. Miranda in the Miranda case, where everyone can now, in the back of their mind, they might not know the whole story, but they know that there's someone out there named Miranda who's the reason why you have a right to remain when you're
Right.
arrested. And I think the more we start to understand and think of the kind of protagonism of immigrants in kind of more ample, wide sort of aperture civil rights context, that will be to the good, because I think that the public will start to appreciate, and we've seen this in the past, different glimmers in which, it's clear that immigrant rights leaders are leaders in the labor movement. I mean, I don't think they get as much attention there as they should as well. But the idea that this is not just an immigration fight, but these are immigrants that are civil rights leaders fighting for all of us, I think we have to put that into the national conversation, and again, those who are in a position to say, hey, look, and you might be at the place where you say, hey, look, this Supreme Court is already illegitimate. It is already lost its legitimacy. Those voices, I think, are helpful. And by the way, in the women's rights movement, you have a lot of constitutional scholars and civil rights litigators. They're already there. Following the overturning of Roe v. Wade. I mean, this is not a legitimate Supreme Court today. It's not a question of like it's losing its legitimacy. And the constraint that lawyers are in is that, we have to, if they required us to put white wigs on, we would do it. May it please the court. I mean, in some sense, we're lending legitimacy by going to that forum.
Right.
We're constrained from doing the kind of outside advocacy, but I do think that others are not similarly constrained. And I think it's very, very important that people understand and carry that message, if they can, that the Supreme Court is eroding its own legitimacy by doing these incredibly disgusting decisions on immigrant rights.
It's funny because, obviously I live in Los Angeles and I've been around some of the ICE raids and have also the demonstrations. And, I can't get how, supposedly, right, a big talking point for the American post John Wayne, Ronald Reagan, leading up to Donald Trump era right has been, the right to freedom, the right from the government to protect against the government incursion. I think if you can just remember how Donald Trump treated Mike Pence, who was the vice president of the United States in the last administration, you'd be able to connect that what's being done to the immigrant workers in Southern California, it's an apparatus that can be turned against other portions of the population, and people would recognize that, but the connection doesn't seem to be being made too much.
If only pointing out hypocrisy were a useful thing for the left, I think we wouldn't be in the situation that we're in.
Yeah,
hypocrisy is so befuddling that it's again, I guess the takeaway point is that the courts are not going to save us. If you're in that category of still holding out hope, I mean, as I was, I'm not there anymore.
Right. I haven't been. I felt like a voice in the wilderness a few months ago. But
Ellen, you're in LA. Like me, and honestly, we need new leaders at the local, state and local level too, because I mean, not to sort of infect you all with my cynicism, but I am extraordinarily proud of how LA has responded to this invasion.
Great, it's been fantastic.
Will be studied and lamented in history books. But what we're seeing, and you could feel free to disagree, and I apologize if I'm.
I think I'm about to agree very strongly. Go ahead. Yeah.
But what we're seeing is leadership on the streets,
from the base.
You're not seeing leadership from Mayor Bass, from Gavin Newsom, from the LA City Council, from the City Attorney's Office, from and maybe it's a different Zoom, because I keep saying this in meetings and people are like shocked to hear me say this, because Karen Bass's approval rating has gone up since despite her doing very, very little. Other than expressing emotional and solidarity in terms of material interventions, there's been very little. I feel less inhibited by saying that nowadays. But I think it's imperative that we again continue to follow and support the leadership of people on the streets, particularly those who are taking risks. And we now need to find ways to put, for lack of a better term, left side pressure on local officials. And here I'm talking specifically about Mayor Bass, Attorney General Bonta, and Governor Newsom here in California. And if there, again, maybe one bit of luck is to see what they did in Chicago, now that other cities are going to start to be subjected to these types of invasions, hopefully there will be some kind of political competition, I guess, between presidential hopefuls Newsom and
Pritzker, yeah.
Pritzker, and maybe that will be to the good, because up until now, LA and California leaders have been let off the hook with doing nothing more than essentially signing sympathy notes.
So I had hoped that you could take just a one round of questions. And so let's do this, Mike Fox. Let's do the PDA to-dos in about 10 to 15 minutes. Chris, if you have a little more time.
Sure, I'll stay 15 minutes more with you.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And I'm glad that Donna got to the top of the stack, because I was going to call on Donna anyway. And Donna, whenever you put your camera on, I'm assuming you're raring to go with the question. So you're going to be first on the stack.
I'm so thank you, Chris, for the work you're doing. I know that's an amazing, amazing gift to everybody who works with you. I hope you're still here, Chris. I don't know where you're.
Oh yeah, he went away because there's so many people that got their hands
okay,
up.
cool.
But
Cool.
here's the
Anyway,
thing.
I wanted to say something about. I think what I am witnessing, and I don't want to go into any detail because I just don't. I have seen some very quiet acts of resistance here in Colorado where there have been very obvious information flow to immigrant communities so that they will know, so that they will be alerted that there is activity pending. And I think that makes me feel a little bit, not a little, but a lot hopeful that some of the local authorities are perhaps not on board with all this horrible stuff going on with immigrants. Are you seeing some of that too, Chris, that there's some, that there's some willingness and there must be some flow of information that says, hey, there's enforcement coming, stay away?
Yeah, I mean, it's a double-edged sword, because behind everything, we've been dealing with the hate groups that are now in the White House, that are the intellectual center of the Trump administration. Their goal is to effectuate a reduction of non-white immigration in the United States. They use the kind of prospect of illegality, undocumented status as the sort of the clarion call, but they want less of everybody, and in some sense, their goal is furthered when we spread messages of fear. I mean, it's a very tricky thing, and there's no real answer to this. But to the extent, I mean, people hear about the fear and the chance of raids. It is contributing to the overall spread of fear, which is clearly like the sort of, the top goal of all of these raids. I mean, to this day, I think the numbers, someone can correct me if I'm wrong, but I honestly, I don't think that Trump has deported more people from LA yet with these raids than Obama did during his first term using the jails. And so in terms of actual numbers, the numbers are still lower because it's X number of agents that have to actually physically go and handcuff people as opposed to getting them from the jails. Thankfully, we have a sanctuary policy that prevents that from happening. But so there's no force multiplication, at least on the surface. But no, I think, yeah, there are certain, political incentives for different jurisdictions at the local level to show solidarity. I think we have to continue to kind of encourage that and demand more. And it's a good question.
Thank you very much.
Alan, you're on mute.
Thank you, Chris. Yeah, I want to just a little ground rules here, because obviously already we have too many hands up. Chris is only going to be able to stay with us for another few minutes. So if we can open up the chat now, and people can write questions in the chat, we will, the staff PDA will save the chat, and we can forward the questions on, not necessarily to Chris, he's very busy, but to Endlon, and see what kind of responses we get from people there, Erika and Chris. But we don't expect Chris to do that extracurricular work for us. But please write your questions in the chat. Also, we at PDA may be able to answer your questions. And but we will go to the stack right now. And Donna, please chime in and co-host as we go forward if you like. But Yvonne, Brandon, right now, please unmute in your question for Chris Newman. Oh, you had unmuted, now you remuted.
Okay.
There you go. I can hear you, Yvonne.
Okay. Well, thank you for what you're doing. But I have a question. You mentioned that it's the people who are going to save us, not the courts. I'm working with a few groups to try to put in a shame letter to the courts and get millions of people to send these letters to the court, kind of like the miracle on 34th Street.
Yeah.
What do you think about that? Do you think it'll work? I know sign-on letters have just become obsolete, but that kind of strategy, how do you feel about that?
I mean, I love it. I love anything that gives atmospheric pressure and sort of outside of the court amicus support to these arguments. So anything that kind of shows your disgust with turning back the clock on, again, I mean, it really, I would just encourage people to read Kavanaugh's concurrence. It is really disgusting. The type that, both, like I said, in terms of its effect and in terms of its rhetoric, I think that would be good. I also would encourage people to reach to their local leaders to the extent that you have any relationship and demand that they do more than they're currently doing, which is very, very little.
Carol Workman, please unmute, Carol.
Chris, I'd like to know if you could update us briefly on what's going on with the Dreamers. I know a young woman here that is a Dreamer. She's the most responsible person. She has a good job, and she has to pay every year to live here and live in fear. And I just want to know what is going on. I know that they have actually detained some people that were Dreamers, and what is happening with that?
Well, of course, I mean, they are in fact de-documenting. It's not just that they're going after undocumented people. They are de-documenting people who have papers, most famously the people with temporary protected status, who are people who've gone, every 18 months, pay $500, go through the most rigorous types of background checks, and they're having their papers. And those people in many ways are in a worst case scenario because, the DHS knows exactly where they live and where they work and all those kinds of things. And so their goal has been to de-document and deport Dreamers. And in the Trump one, we were able to postpone that. But this time they're moving much more expeditiously. In Texas, for example, the case where most of the federal litigation around DACA was active, there was recently a settlement that allows, at least in the state of Texas, for the de-documenting of Dreamers and taking away their work authorization. And so it's ominous. And anyone, I think, who expected that somehow Dreamers were going to be held harmless because of their sort of sympathetic story situation, I think we've moved past that. I can tell you again, to editorialize and go to the next question, but there are those in senior levels of the Democratic Party and leadership in DC that in some ways are, I'll call them accelerationists. They are almost kind of secretly hoping that more bad comes to sympathetic immigrants because that will make their job in the next election and the election after that easier by creating a contrast. Oh, Trump is so terrible, he's even deporting Dreamers. So I wouldn't even assume that we have natural allies in support of defending Dreamers at this stage, because again, there's a kind of very cynical current. I'll just call it at the Chuck Schumer level, that kind of sees every atrocity against immigrants as kind of good politically for Democrats.
Augustine Villarreal, if you could please unmute, Augustine.
Hello. Hello.
Hello.
My name is Augustine. What I've seen the last 8 months is the Trump administration have banned DEI for employers like me that I wanted to work. And I wanted to start working, but they start what's called banning it and dismantling it, including people with special needs to work and stuff. And I saw it happen. So, and this administration has taken away people with special needs rights in Texas and everywhere, and I seen it happen. And all I want to do is just work like everybody else. And what Trump's trying to do is that makes everyone's lives worse, like us, people with special needs, and to not live on their own, and it's very harder. That's all I want, and to work and take care of my family.
Thank you, Augustine. Should we go to the next person, Chris?
Yes, please.
Hillary Keys, please unmute. And Mo Hiaga will be next.
Hi, can you hear me today?
Sure
Yes.
can.
Oh, good. A few months ago, when things started heating up, I ordered online a box of those red cards, Know Your Rights. But I'm wondering if there's any validity to that even bothering anymore, because
Yeah.
obviously the rights are
Uh,
taken.
I talked with my boss Pablo and with Erika the weekend before the Monday, and we had planned to do this kind of Know Your Rights like series on with videos telling people mostly to like not run, because it appears from the filings on the habeas cases that the ICE agents are using running away from them, even though they're armed and and masked as somehow evidence of suspicion. We don't really know, to be honest with you, at this stage, what the best sort of know your rights posture is, because we're in this really shitty situation where we don't even know what the administration is going to do to arrogate more authority given the Supreme Court decision. And I mean, I think those red cards are I mean, they're good in the abstract to know your rights, but as I used to say when I would do public trainings, I'm pretty sure that Rodney King knew that his rights were being violated while he was getting, beaten. And so it's a question of knowing your rights and figuring out how to best put them into practice. And I honestly don't have good feedback on that for today. We're gonna have to react to the new raid practices that we see in the coming weeks. But I do know that that people being around with phones videotaping, that is extraordinarily useful. If you're in a privilege, if you're a U.S. citizen, and know that, for example, you're not going to be, forcibly removed from the country, I would encourage you to keep getting out there and videotaping any police or federal agent activity you see.
And Chris, this is Donna again. I wanted to ask in that light, I'm noticing even I'm sure everybody else is, at least the main media, the major media, the networks and so forth, they're all rolling over basically to the Trump administration in terms of how they report, what importance they give to certain stories and what they say. So how important do you see citizen journalism in terms of trying to get stuff out there?
Imperative. Donna, I'm so happy you asked that question. First off, if you want to know what's going on in LA, subscribe. And if you're on social media or whatever, subscribe to LA Taco, which is doing amazing work, way ahead of the LA Times in terms of fact-based reporting of what's happening. I'm very, very worried about this point, because to me, I can just in my own life see that what I call the Gazification of Los Angeles, which is that people know that there's bad stuff happening, but in order to not get bummed out, they're just not clicking on the links anymore. So in a weird way, I agree with you, by the way. I mean, MSNBC had totally abandoned the field for 15 years and weren't doing any stories, much less getting clicks on the stories, while Fox was engaging in this kind of frothing feedback loop that got, spread hate and also got lots of clicks. So I guess my plea is it's the same with Gaza, frankly, which is, even if you feel helpless, minimally click on the links, bear witness, and see what's going on. Do not get dehumanized yourself. I saw, Augustine's point about how people are being dehumanized. Yes, Trump is dehumanizing his putative targets, but he's dehumanizing all of us, because he's creating this kind of indifference to suffering that we all see in our lives, which is that people just want to live and don't want to spend their day clicking on links about terrible, horrific stuff. And so contribute to the citizen journalism, click on the links, share them, continue to kind of use yourself as a conduit in media, force your, friends on your Facebook page, if that's your social media of choice, to be confronted with images that are uncomfortable, even if they say, oh, Donna, you're bumming me out with all of your, bad news or whatever. Well, bum people out, because we're going to have to keep doing that. And I think that underneath all of this is this kind of imbalance, an imbalance of incentives for our changing media landscape, where, as I'm sure, I think I came in at the end of a conversation about Charlie Kirk, where kind of hostility gets rewarded, but nothing else.
Mohi, Aga, you're going to be the last person to ask a question of Chris Newman. As for Nina, Judith, Melissa, and Heidi, just please enter a question into the chat, or we'll get back to the stack in about 10 or 15 minutes. But Mohi, please, if I'm pronouncing your name correctly, I apologize if I'm not.
That's okay. This is Moji.
Moji, go ahead.
Moji Aga. I'm an Iranian American Sufi Muslim, nonviolence and peace activist, and human rights activist. And it's not I raise my hand to talk more about something I believe a lot more fundamental going on in this society. That is what we are seeing in Trump and in the assassination of this person in Utah is a shadow of this country, as Jung talks about shadow. And this is something that requires a lot more reflection as to a society that is so out of balance that it loses the nominal democracy that was created for the lucky white-skinned European settler colonials. So I don't have a question for Chris. Chris, thank you for what you're doing, but we need to have forums for much deeper looking at what's happening in this country and morality.
Thank you for that.
Being killed.
Thank you, Alan, so much, and Donna, and everyone.
I might maybe ask you one thing quick, Chris, before, because a little follows from what Moji said. Maybe your thoughts on this as you leave us today. One of the dynamics of what's been going on with Trump is the clear targeting of population centers, and Los Angeles very much in particular. Los Angeles and New York are arguably the most diverse metropolitan areas in the history of humanity. And per what Moji said, the promise of our society is in this incredible diversity, is to be a countervailing force against ethno-nationalism around the world as it rises as a reaction to the inequalities and inequities of neoliberal capitalism. That in Los Angeles, now, of course, we're operating inside that economic sphere. But I've had for a couple decades now, a great sense of pride for this metropolitan area, for its beautiful diversity. And of course, this is anathema to Stephen Miller, who comes from Santa Monica, and Donald Trump, who's been a lifelong bigot and white supremacist. So your thoughts on, again, maybe returning to this positive note about LA and the mobilization and the kind of solidarity that those of us who are in the privileged position of being, European Americans in the context of contemporary Los Angeles with this going on.
Yeah, well, don't. Los Angeles is facing a number of challenges. Okay, anyone who lives here will acknowledge that.
Sure.
The homeless population.
Cost.
But don't fall into the trap of allowing the city to be maligned as then a pretext for this invasion, and then think of that orientation. And I would urge you to use that as your guide when you think of all of these different targets, whether it's in terms of urban centers or activists. Years ago when Joe Arpaio was sort of creating the kind of political and legal technology that Trump is now using, masked agents, demonizing populations, and I was privileged to be involved in litigation there. Whenever we would have disagreements about kind of tactics or strategies, we had a rule that we would always defer to the people that are taking the most amount of risk. And I think that there's a real danger on our side right now to, you see this kind of discourse maligning the groups. Oh, as if it's somehow the defund police hashtag people are responsible for Trump, or the abolish ICE people were responsible. People who are defending these virtues that you just discussed, they get maligned, and go out of your way to find and show solidarity with the people who are taking the most amounts of risk. Because as we go, we're not even a year into this. We have 3 more years, and it's not going to be clean. I represented people that were targeted by the Trump administration, and we expected Andiola that they will target us.
Mm-hmm. Right.
The Project 2025 documents, already accuse us of being a criminal enterprise. And if and when that day comes, it won't be clean. It won't be like, oh, you were giving water bottle, we're charging you for that. They will find some way, or some legitimate, like some little grain of legitimacy, like
right.
a little homelessness problem or whatever, as the pretext to then target. And you're quite right, Alan. I mean, Los Angeles in every way is a repudiation of Trump in its pluralism, in its diversity, in the fact that it's a sanctuary policy that was refraining. We'd finally gotten to a point in LA where nobody was being turned over from the sheriff custody and to ICE. Years of fighting the Obama administration to get to that point, and so what they'll do is they'll find kind of some insolvency in Los Angeles. I remember this came up with, for example, early on, with people would talk about the protests and the riots and the burning of the Waymo cars, and I'm sitting here going like, look, my city's under attack. I am extraordinarily proud of how peaceful our response has been given the circumstances. I mean, you could talk about the example, and you could be tuning to Fox News and looking at the Waymo image. That's not what I'm looking at. What I'm looking at is a different picture of incredible beauty and solidarity and peaceful resistance. And so don't take the bait and just merely like do the hot takes on the the objects that they're putting in front of you, because that's what they're going to start to do, is a similar kind of version of what they've done to LA to everybody. And they will find some kernel of a kind of legitimate concern and then use that as a pretext. And so, I'm happy for that final thought in provocation, and grateful you raised it, because I'm extremely proud of LA. I just wish our elected leadership would start to show a fraction of the leadership that we're seeing on the streets.
Well, thank you so much.
Denver will hang in. I hope Denver's going to make it through like LA is. We know it's coming to Denver. We know. Right?
Fingers crossed. Well, I hope to be in community with you guys again, and I'm very grateful for this invitation and grateful for spending time.
Likewise, and yes, please, we will continue to reach out to Andiola, and Erika is one of our strongest just partners for years and years, and it's great to have you on, Chris, and we'll be in touch. Thank you so much.
Brilliant. Thank you.
And Donna and Mike Fox. So if you really were going to pass the test and get an A++ on the test that's going to be given to the audience members at the end of this town hall, you would remember that I said I have 4 things to announce before I got around to introducing Chris. And I only did 3. Well, the 4th is that I have to get into a car in about 10 minutes. Somebody I work with, a filmmaker, great radical filmmaker, Nina Menkes, has a screening over in Hollywood at 3:00. I'm going to get on my phone and I'm going to join the call and be on it. But I'm going to throw to Mike Fox right now. I have to go just quickly in 5 minutes, get ready to go. Then I'll try to chime back in on this computer, then make the transition to my phone and join people from the car. And Mike, if you could just fill for me, and Donna, if you have the capacity to stay for 10 minutes and help me on this bridge, that would be great. I know you might have to go.
Yeah, I'm here.
Okay, so we're up to the PA to do. So Mike and Donna, take it away, and I'll be back. I'll be back in 7 minutes or so. Okay.
Oh, for it, Mike.
Yeah, real quick. All right. So Donna, it looks like we need to fill in for 7 minutes. Mike Olis, I know, was going to be joining us in regards to the Utah folk. Mike Olis, if you can chime in right after I get done with our thank yous. Stick with us here, gang. My favorite part, actually, I'm going to show solidarity with those folks who can't turn their cameras on by turning mine off. And I have my favorite job of the week to do here, and that is
Me too. I'm turning mine off, but I'm here, Mike.
all good. And my favorite job of the week is the thank yous. The following people have donated today. Thank you so much. Brad and Patricia and Yvonne and Audra and Rick, phone banker Rick out in Missouri. So good to see you, brother. I understand there were some health challenges there. Wonderful to see you back and kicking, brother. And phone banker William double dipping, and Kathleen and Kim, Michael, phone banker Nancy double dipping, Brad, Charles, Margaret, Quincy, Becky, Kathy, and Dr. Deutsch double dipping. Dr. Deutsch, as always, thank you, brother. And Nadine and phone banker Betsy double dipping, and phone banker Jane double dipping, and Neil and phone banker Beverly double dipping, and C. Arthur and phone banker Dr. Sonneborn out in California double dipping. Same way with double dipping phone banker Mary and double dipping phone banker Carol, our chapter head up in West Virginia. Carol rocks. And phone banker Michael double dipping. And I want to thank everybody who has stood up to volunteer as well. We're still going. We're still short on our goals thus far, but we're moving in the right direction. The reason why we're short is because we had a tremendous presentation, and I certainly do hope that oh, look at Chris. Spit it out, Mike. That Chris ends up coming back to see us once again. All right, so I'm going to do a shout out to Mike Olis here and see if we, Mike, can you unmute and just let us know if we have those folks that you were talking to in regards to Utah?
Hey, Mike Fox and PDA Nation, how's it going today? Another town hall. You doing good, Mike Fox?
Oh, always, my brother. And Michael was on the road as well, as always. Thank you, brother.
Yeah, we're actually going to have our PDA Indianapolis in-person meeting here in about 30 minutes. So I'm in our meeting space right now. But I do want to show off my new PDA shirt. If you see it, you know, we're going to look to move some PDA shirts around. And this is just a prototype right now. But we want to, you know, over here in the next couple days and weeks, get some folks some T-shirts and really build up our fashion game and our merch game. So, but we had a big meeting yesterday, and we got our 6 prototypes out in public with our PDA shirts. So if you like what you see, we'll get you some. We'll get these moving around here. But yeah, Mike and Alan and team. For those who don't know me, my name is Mike Olis. I'm the Chief of Staff of Progressive Democrats of America. And somebody's like, there are a lot of Mikes who work at PDA, and so it's so confusing with so many Mikes. But I'm Mike Olis, and that's Mike Fox, and
I'm
we
not
got a
Mike.
bunch of Mikes running around.
I'm not Mike.
And that's Donna Smith. But you know, it's been a really tough week, I think, for us in the progressive movement, and really for anybody in America right now, thinking about what happened in Utah on Wednesday and what how do we respond as progressives, and you know, what happens if progressive become under attack these next days and weeks, and you know, the progressive movement that most of us are part of and are raised in, you know, is based on nonviolence. You know, that is the ethic of the progressive movement, and so it's really tough when we preach nonviolence and social justice, and the other side preaches violence and hatred, and then they try to flip the tables on us. So we're in for a rocky couple of days and weeks and months, and really until the end of the Trump era, I think. And so we want to, you know, I was talking to a friend of mine about progressives in Utah, and it looks like we might have had some of our conversations cross a little bit. I don't know if Dan is with us. Dan Sunrock, who is a doctor who specializes in trauma. He was going to talk to us a little bit about, you know, just where we are in this moment and how can we respond, you know, from a from somebody who works in trauma and works in with people who've experienced violence. And so I don't see him on yet. So
Well, I see he's here, and I've asked him to unmute, Mike.
okay, great. So Dan, if you're out there, I'm gonna probably just say hello, then pass the conversation to you.
Are you with us, Dan? He's in the room. I've asked to unmute once again. Daniel Sumrock, can you unmute? Technology might not be our friend right now. It's all good. Nothing but love.
And Dan's actually a doctor in, based in the South Central United States, not in Utah, but somebody that we have a very strong mutual friend who does has deep connections to Utah. And this mutual friend was talking about just how Utah progressives right now are feeling it and need our national support and really need to be linked up with us coast to coast.
Looks like Daniel was able to unmute. Daniel, are you out there?
I'm out here. Can you hear me?
Indeed, sir. Thank you so much. Sorry.
Hi,
for
Dr. Dan.
technological challenges.
So I can't see myself, and I guess that's probably good. Can anybody else see me?
Nope.
Okay.
Long story, but thank you for being here.
Well, yeah. So I'm in Tennessee, in East Tennessee right now, in the Smokies, and I just returned from about a week in West Virginia, which is my original home up at Marshall University, and where I did the original stuff about post-traumatic stress disorder, and my focus of these past 25 years has been dealing with trauma and the nexus of trauma and substance use disorders, and I guess for me I sort of wasn't paying much attention to Charlie Kirk. I have a black wife and a lot of chocolate kids, and we see rebel flags and hear hate speech all the time, and what I tell them is that that's not going away, the flag just makes it easier to identify the haters. I also think that if they keep talking, they impugn their own integrity. So I think we're the attempt to polarize this, and the extremes are always the enemy, but the attempt to polarize this is really the thing that we need to resist. I think somebody just said they're trying to paint us as the violent ones. They're trying to flip the script on us, and I think that's absolutely right. So I think we can't take the bait. I think we have to be bigger than that, and I think bigger than that appeals to a large majority of Americans. Now, lately the right has done everything it can to control the narrative, and they've been pretty good at that, and the Supreme Court's helped them, and the dumb, I mean, as in mute Congress, it have been collaborators. So I looked at the website, or I was looking for the website today for the United States Institute for Peace, and that's been completely shut down by Musk and Doge, and so where do we start? How do we approach this? I think for us to have legitimacy as a voice, we can't be the extreme. We have to appeal to the mainstream with common sense and dignity. And as far as the far right, I don't think you can embarrass them. I think that trying to appeal to their better angels is, it's fraught. You can't embarrass someone who has no conscience. So how do we deal with trauma? I don't know what people are doing on an individual level. I'd like to hear some of those kinds of things. What I did this week is talk to folks in West Virginia about trauma, about how are they feeling? How's this affecting you? And I heard things like, my mind feels like it's blurred. My back hurts. My chest feels tight. My legs feel weak. And how are you approaching that? You know, for me, that means connecting with other people. For me, that means some spiritual rescue. And I'm not talking about religious rescue. I'm talking about spirituality as the connection between the inside of you and all the stuff externally, right? All the people and places and all the things that we know. How are we connected to those things? You know, I'm doing that in my family. I got the first text from my daughter who's out in New York City, and she said, "I just saw this hideous video." And that was before it was taken down. And, you know, she said the blood and the gore. And I could tell that she was physically affected by that. And, you know, I think we all, you know, have suffered this vicarious kind of trauma that's very real. I'm a combat veteran, Vietnam, Panama, Grenada, Gulf War. And I felt all those feelings of sort of a fuzzy mind and an achy body and sort of hopelessness. And the only way I can rescue myself for that is to put one foot in front of the other and keep on moving. Keep on talking. Try not to divide. Look for the common threads. You know, the far right is appealing to people's fear, and they're doing it very effectively. So you know, I don't even like the characterizations of right and left. I think that just plays into the sense of the notions of polarization. So I'd like to hear what other people are doing to cope with their trauma.
Hey, Daniel and everybody, I'm just quickly, Donna and Mike, I'm now going to sign off of this and I'm going to get onto this. And so just folks and the staff, let me into the room when I come back, and take it away, Donna, and I'll be joining you from the car in about 3 minutes. Thank you.
Daniel, first of all, that was extraordinary. Really, thank you for talking about that. And before you were on the call, I spoke about the dual trauma we had here in Colorado with a school shooting this past week, and having in my own family, my son was one of the people who was not shot in a workplace shooting 30 years ago. And I have to tell people always that trauma doesn't ever seem to go away. In some ways, it seems to be revisited every time there's a mass shooting somewhere. There's this elevation of terror and this elevation of what should I do? How can I do anything? My son even got very angry, and I've learned to take this after mass shootings. But he says, nothing you've done matters. Well, that's hard to hear, but it's something that scares me. So, Daniel, how do those of us who have some connection to a very serious trauma like a mass shooting, how do we contribute to the conversation without sounding like we're whining or we're trying to somehow elevate our own suffering? I don't know how to ask that, actually.
Yeah. So this afternoon, I was thinking about substance use disorders, and I got a call from Kimberly Conkle, and she said, let's see what we can do to find common ground and heal around this trauma that we've all experienced. And I don't think I have any magic words. I think, it occurred to me that once upon a time and happily ever after and are the beginning and the end of a fairy tale, and everything in between is real life. We have to, as far as I can tell, we have to go on living life with dignity. We have to treat our friends, neighbors, and even our enemies with dignity. We have to, again, appeal to the better angels, if you will, understanding that sometimes that's not effective. But what gives us legitimacy is our willingness to. I think someone has said, keep it a peaceful movement. To resist the temptation to violence. I was a Green Beret. When I hear things like this, I'd like to do something that's not nonviolent. But I have to remind myself that the way I can make a difference in this world isn't by squashing my enemies. It's by proving to the people that are in doubt that we do have dignity and we do have a purpose, and that purpose is in promoting the welfare of our communities. And again, that begins at home. So Again, no magic words. Again, I think once upon a time begins a fantasy, and happily ever after is the end of that fantasy. But we live in the middle, and so today for me that has meant talking to people about what can we do about substance use disorder in Huntington, West Virginia. How can we approach this in a community-minded, comprehensive way that's not separating people, that's not allowing. I think this Trump guy, I mean, he's a demagogue, right? He's a kind of guy that creates a problem and then swoops in and says, "Hey, I'm the only guy here that can solve this," right? And it's those pesky liberals and those progressives and those lefties. And by the way, anybody that he disagrees with, he's going to paint as a lefty. So again, I think for me, it's about on the ground. It's about real actions. It's about resisting the temptation to take the bait. I'd like to hear what other people are doing. For me, I walked the past couple of days several miles, and when I could get some time to do that, and that helps me. I made sure that I was getting some sleep. I made sure that I was actually eating. Again, those aren't fancy medical interventions. Those are things that I think we can all do to sort of undo this collective trauma or cope with this collective trauma. Vietnam's not going to go away for me. None of those things are ever going to be, unless I, lose my mind. I'm always going to have that as part of me. But it doesn't mean I have to react in a way that's unwise. I chose years ago not to drink myself to death when I was headed down that path. I chose not to use drugs when I was headed down that path. I chose not to point fingers at the other guys when it was a temptation. And today I don't get to choose what comes to me, but I do get to choose how I show up. And so I'm choosing today not to, demonize Charlie Kirk. I mean, there's plenty of stuff out there that's, ugly things that he said. I went back and read some of his stuff because, again, I've been pretty well ignoring those guys for a long time. There's plenty of ugly stuff out there, but I'm choosing not to demonize him. I'm choosing not to meet their, accusations with mine. I just think if it turns into a shouting match, we've all lost.
Amen, Daniel. Mike Fox here. I see Alan is back with us. Alan, do you want to take the reins here, or do you just want to drive, which would probably be
well, it's fast. I really enjoyed listening to that. Thank you so much for your reflections and sharing. I'm fine with just co-hosting with Donna if Donna's cool with that. And I do think we should wrap the town hall at the top of the hour and go to family time at that point. Of course, that
I would insert as the guy that you're going to throw to. Let's say we wrap the recording right now and try to wrap by the top of the hour. It's been a long day for everybody.
Sure, and let me then say this, if it's okay, and Donna, feel free to chime in as I can just wrap, and then we can go back to Donna and I hosting in family time for the next 15 minutes, or Donna can go if she wants. But I do want to just end on, first of all, thanking, of course, Chris Newman from Endlon, and of course, thank Erika Andiola for helping bring Chris to our town hall this week. I thought that was very, very illuminating and informational segment, very important segment to get information about the state of the court cases around ICE and the rulings of the Supreme Court, how troubling they are, how troubling the reality is, how important social action, solidarity, public solidarity is, and organizing. So thank you very much, Chris Newman, for that. I also want to thank, again, the gentleman we just heard from, and Donna, of course, thank you for stepping in and helping co-host this town hall. Mike Fox, as always. And I do want to end on this, though, as we are touching on still the subject relating to the assassination of Charlie Kirk, and in a context in which the President of the United States is effectively announcing that he intends to target or is targeting organizations that, at least on the surface, would somewhat fit a profile similar to this. Well, we are in no way an organization that represents any problems on those fronts to American society. In fact, we, much like the last speaker, feel that we represent very positive approaches to the crises facing American society for the benefit of all. And we certainly reject absolutely political violence.
Yep, you're muted, Alan.
Oh,
Yeah,
boy.
I mean, I always think it's interesting. I want everybody to have health care. Every person around me. I don't care
Yeah.
what political stripe they are. So I want everybody to have access to those things that are needed in this world. And so that's the peaceful side of me that I want to present to other neighbors and friends around me. And I so agree with what Daniel said about stop. It's so hard to not demonize some people, but at the same time, the minute we start doing that, we've lost.
Thank you, Don. I think you can hear me now. Is that correct?
Yes. Yep.
Yeah, just to wrap before we go to family, just want to again cite the Bernie Sanders very eloquent video from 2 days ago, and really he says exactly what I feel position is on these questions, on the rejection of political violence, and in harmony with what Dan was saying, what Donna was just saying, the type of dialogue that we believe in facilitating to produce the best kind of democratic society, where all our voices can be heard and collectively we can make the best decisions about how our society moves forward. So
Of course, technology is going to not be our friend. So,
oh yeah, go ahead, Mike.
yeah, you locked up there, Alan. Let's wrap this.
Okay, yeah, no, that's it. Just see you next week. Another PA town hall. I believe we're going to have Adelita Grijalva again as our guest, one of our guests next week. So join us next Sunday and for another PA town hall. Take it away, Mike Fox.